2 p.m. Hearing on Type 4 demolition and adjustment review for the Blanchard House. Clerk, will you please read the item?
Do you mind if I call the roll first, Madam President?
Sorry. I guess we should know if anybody's here, right? My apologies. Yes, please call the roll.
Great, thank you. Ryan. Hardesty.
Here.
Maps.
Here.
Rubio.
Here.
Wheeler.
Thank you. And now, if I will have the clerk read the item.
Madam President.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I feel like we're just interrupting you, but would you please read, if you have it, the script about having to meet electronically first, and I'll do the rules of decorum. And if you don't have it, I have an approximation of it.
I would appreciate you providing a proclamation, because I did not get those. I did not get that. I just have the script for the hearing.
Sure, let me do that, and then I will follow with the conduct during hearings, and then we'll go to read the item if that's okay.
That'd be perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Under Portland City Code and state law, the council is holding this meeting electronically. All members are attending remotely by video and teleconference. Through required public notice, the public is invited to also participate remotely and can provide testimony during today's hearing. The council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communication. Thank you all for your patience, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. Now I will read a statement of conduct during electronic council meetings. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with Council Clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or first readings of ordinances. The published council agenda at portlandoregon.gov/auditor contains information about how and when you may sign up for testimony when council is holding electronic meetings. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When your time is up, the presiding officer will ask you to conclude. Disruptive conduct such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected from the remainder of the electronic meeting. Thank you, President of the Council.
Man, I really am taking on the president's role. Am I talking while I'm muted? Thank you so much. It's always good that you keep us legal. I'm very grateful. Okay, third time's the charm, I know. I will now ask Megan to read the item.
Item 527, consider proposal of 340 Northwest Gleason for demolition review and adjustment review approval and Bureau of Development staff recommendation for denial for a contributing building, the Old Blanchett House at 340 Northwest Gleason Street in the new Chinatown, Japantown National Register Historic District.
Thank you. And now the city attorney will give us some announcements about today's hearing.
Yes, if you're not tired of hearing it from me yet, President. This is an evidentiary hearing, which means you may submit new evidence to counsel in support of your argument. Testimony will be heard as follows. We will begin with a staff report by BDS staff for approximately 10 minutes. Following from the staff report, counsel will hear from interested persons in the following order. The applicant will go first and have 10 minutes to address counsel. After the applicant, counsel will hear from individuals or organizations who support the applicant's proposal. Each person will have 3 minutes. Next, we will hear from representatives of the Historic Landmarks Commission for 5 minutes. Then counsel will hear from persons or organizations who oppose the applicant's proposal. Each person will have 3 minutes. If there was testimony in opposition to the applicant's proposal, the applicant will have 5 additional minutes to rebut testimony given in opposition to the proposal. Then counsel may close the hearing and deliberate. The council may take a vote today. If the vote is a tentative vote, council will set a future date for the adoption of findings and a final vote. There are several guidelines I'd like to announce for those who will be addressing City Council today. First, submitting evidence into the record. Any letters or documents you wish to become part of the record should be given to the council clerk after you testify, and you may do that electronically. Any slides, photographs, drawings, maps, videos, or other items that you wish to enter into evidence need to be given to the council clerk to make sure they become part of the record. Second, testimony must be directed to approval criteria. Any testimony, arguments, and evidence you present must be directed toward the applicable approval criteria for this land use review or other criteria in the city's comprehensive plan or zoning code that you believe apply to the decision. BDS staff will identify the applicable approval criteria as part of their staff report to council. Third, issues must be raised with specificity. You must raise an issue clearly enough to give the council and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue. If you don't, you will be precluded from appealing to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Fourth, the applicant must identify constitutional challenges to conditions of approval. If the applicant fails to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with enough specificity to allow council to respond, the applicant will be precluded from bringing an action for damages in circuit court. Fifth, prior to the close of this hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony. If such a request is made, the council will either grant a continuance or hold the record open to provide an opportunity to submit additional evidence and an opportunity to respond to that new evidence. And that concludes my remarks. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you very much, Lindley. That was very thorough. Now, it is my job to ask, do any members of the council wish to declare a conflict of interest in this matter? Commissioner Mapps.
Madam President, I don't have a conflict of interest, but I have, since I've been on this council, I have gone down and looked at the site, largely in the context of visiting the homeless services that are provided by the parties before us today. I think that visit was in early February, if I remember correctly.
Thank you, Commissioner Mapps. Commissioner Rubio.
Madam President, I too would just like to declare that I have visited this site recently, or within probably the last 1 to 2 months.
Thank you. Commissioner Ryan was still attempting to get on the line. Hopefully he'll be able to join us soon. He was having some internet difficulties. This does not appear to be a conflict of interest. And so based on what the council members have told me, I see no council member has a conflict of interest as prescribed. Then my next question for the council, does any council member of the council have ex parte contacts to declare or information gathered outside of this hearing to disclose?
Commissioner Hardesty, I think Commissioner Rubio, in declaring a site visit, if that site visit happened after the application was submitted in late March, it would be considered potentially an ex parte contact. So let's put it in that category. So when you ask if anybody wants to question or challenge the ex parte contact, this would be the time to do that.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to challenge or question the ex parte communication as represented by Commissioner Rubio? I am not seeing any challenges to Commissioner Rubio's declaration. And we're good for me to move to question 2. Got to keep looking at my lawyer, make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to do here, because this is a legal official process.
So Commissioner, I guess one thing I would say is, as you're asking these questions, because we're electronic rather than where somebody could stand up in chambers, the way, if you are an attendee today, the way that you would identify that you have an objection is by doing a hand raise on Zoom. And if you're having problems with that, please text the council clerk.
Thank you. Do any members of the council have ex parte contacts to declare or information gathered outside of the hearing to disclose today? I will call on myself, Council President, and my very first month in office, the very first place I visited was Blanchard House, and did tour the property and did have conversations with leadership there. But that is the last time in my official role as a city council member I have had communication with individuals that represent Blanchard House. So am I declaring a ex parte communication?
So the date of that
January of 2019.
No, because the application wasn't submitted, but you can still ask if anybody has any questions or wants to challenge it.
Does anybody have any questions of me based on the information I've just disclosed? Please use the Zoom hand raise or just speak up so that I can make sure I don't miss anyone. There does not appear to be any questions on my behalf. Any other council members? Seeing none, there does not appear to be additional council members who've had ex parte communication. And so, have any members of the council made any visits to the sites involved in this matter other than what you've disclosed so far? Seeing none, no one has appears to have visited the site. Do the council members have any other matters, excuse me, that need to be discussed before we begin the hearing? Commissioner Rubio.
I just want to clarify, I'm just disclosing at the right time, or
it's on the public record, Commissioner Rubio, so I think you are covered. Otherwise, Lindsay would have been jumping in and making me do something different. So I appreciate you checking, but I've kept my eye on Lindsay's eyes, and as long as they're good, I was fine. Thank you for checking, though. I think this is the first kind of hearing like this that we've had with the majority of our council being new. So it is really good that you get clarification early. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Again, my last question was, do any members of the council have any additional matters to discuss before we begin the hearing? Seeing no matters. In that case, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Lindley. Is that it?
Sure, I'm glad. We're going to call for testimony. I'm glad to help through that. First up is the staff report for 10 minutes.
Excellent. Staff?
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's cooler today than they were the last few days. My name is Tim Herron. I'm with the Bureau of Development Services. I'm a senior planner. I also wrote the staff report of recommendation you have before you, and I'm going to talk through this once I share my screen. Okay. I'm assuming you guys can all see my screen. So this is a staff report recommendation, the Portland City Council for the Type 4 demolition review. LU 21-029602 DM-AD. That is a demolition review DM, and an adjustment request, which is the AD. This is for the old Blanchet House, otherwise known as the Yamaguchi Hotel, located at 340 Northwest Gleason Street. Our city attorney Lily already rattled off the order, but just to kind of give you a little visual, I'm going to start and then I'll hand over to the applicant and then we'll follow through the rest of the order. So really quick, this type 4 process, you're correct, Commissioner. I don't believe any of you have seen one of these, and it's not just because you're new, they just don't happen that often. Last time we had it was about 5 years ago. So it's a thorough process. Pre-application is required, a proposals notice goes out, the site's required to be posted. There's a public meeting with the Historic Landmarks Commission. And then of course, we're here today in our city council hearing. A little background, demolition review was born back in 2002 through a resolution and moved forward into an ordinance as a part of the Historic Resource Code Amendments project. Essentially, this is about refining relationships between our local and state historic codes to just kind of improve clarity in our regulations. Ultimately, demolition review gives the public an opportunity to comment on the proposed demolition of a historic resource and allows opportunities for alternatives to demolition to be explored. So I'm going to walk through a couple of precedents. This one's probably the most relevant, and this was for the 2010 Kiernan Building demolition. The Kiernan Building was a one-story commercial building. It was otherwise known as the Dirty Duck. If you've been in Portland long enough, you may have gone there. As far as what replaced it ultimately, which was a large part of the approval of council for the demolition, was the new Blanchet House of Hospitality, which is the Riley House. A fantastic building, not only for its mission and services, but also for its architecture and blending in with the district. This building was ultimately approved by the Historic Landmarks Commission. Notably, here on the corner is the subject site, and this is the 3-story old Blanchet House, otherwise known as the Yamaguchi Hotel. Council got to approval on this because the new facility encompassed, among other things, low-income housing, soup kitchen, and other related services. It's just a highest best use of the site. Our next precedent is the 2014 Buck Prager building demolition. This was denied by City Council. The proposal that came before council was for a 4 to 6-story market rate building that required the demolition of the building. City Council noted that the market rate apartment did not provide a significant public benefit to compensate for the loss of the historic district. Washington Park Reservoirs in 2015, that was the big one, and that was a demolition review. It was approved in part because council recognized the impact of the geological forces acting on these historic resources and our responsibility to provide water, basic clean water, but also the mitigation proposed was comparable to the magnitude of the loss of the historic resources. So lastly, we come back to the Buck Prager, and this ultimately was an approval for an addition to the Buck Prager. After council's denial in 2014, the site came back. 2 new buildings were proposed that straddled the building, which also helped offset the cost of restoring the older Buck Prager building. The Landmarks Commission approved this and would be providing for 148 new affordable housing units. So today we have a proposal for the demolition review and adjustment request. It's called the number 1 and number 2. Number 1 demolition review, the approval criteria is denial of a demolition permit would effectively deprive the owner of all reasonable economic use of the site. Number 2, which is an adjustment review, which is essentially a request to not provide a replacement building, is the request to waive the standard, which requires a new building to replace the demolished building if the demolition review is approved. These images walk you through, obviously, the Blanchet House. Here's where it sits on the larger block, which is otherwise known as block 25. This is in blue here indicates it's a contributing structure. The yellow indicates non-contributing. This area is vacant parking lot, happens to be owned by Prosper Portland. This is the quarter block, the new Riley House. And of course, this is where it sits in the context of the larger Chinatown, Japantown Historic District. So a demolition review, the purpose is to protect to protect resources like contributing buildings in National Register Historic Districts. Demolition review recognizes that historic resources are irreplaceable assets that preserve our heritage, the beauty of the city, enhance civic identity, and promote economic vitality. The approval criteria 2, the adjustment review, in effect, not asking to waive the requirement for a replacement building, speaks to equally better meeting the purpose of the standard being modified, that the adjustment, if approved, is consistent with the street classifications and the desired character of the area. The impacts of the adjustment are mitigated, historic resources are preserved. So really quick basics, zoning sheet. The site is in the red hatched area here within the larger context of the new Chinatown, Japantown Historic District. Height limits for this area are 200 feet, subject to Historic Landmarks Commission approval in the new Chinatown, Japantown design guidelines. The floor area ratio is 9:1 with bonus, so there's a lot of potential for this site. Floor area ratio is essentially a ratio of their floor plate times the number. So 9:1 would mean 9 floors extruded from the floor plate. The new Chinatown, Japantown Historic District, a little history, and it's important because it's very unique to Portland. Typically, many National Register Historic Districts may be promoted because of their design or construction criterion, but in this case, the new Chinatown, Japantown Historic District is under our criterion A, which is specific to historic associations with American history. It is the only historic district in Portland significant for its association with ethnic history. The new Chinatown, Japantown is a major Chinese immigration center for the state and represents the Chinese who lived and worked in the area. The historic district portrays the traditional nature of Chinese social, political, cultural, and economic organizations. So the old Blanchet House, why we're here today, the Yamaguchi Hotel, 340 Northwest Gleason, built in 1905. It was managed by Mr. and Mrs. Yamaguchi, which is commonly referred to as the Yamaguchi Hotel till about 1931. Mrs. Yamaguchi was also a midwife in the Asian community. And then of course, the Blanchet House owned and operated from 1952, still owns it today, but ran it till 2012 with its impressive mission. The building is contributing to the district because it's an association with Asian ethnic community. So getting to the staff's recommendation, the demolition review, staff feels the criterion is not met, and primarily across 4 points. The existing condition of the Blanchet House was deemed in good condition in 1989. This was under the ownership, of course, of the Blanchet House. In efforts to sell the house, the property was offered to sale to Prosper Portland, the only entity it was offered to. Prosper Portland, the reason why, owns the remainder of the block, as I stated here, and also is sponsored in part an RFP for the key development proposal, which is in the staff report. And this rendering here just simply shows how the build out of the full 3/4 block could occur. It also presumes the demolition of the Blanchet House. 3, there are potential redevelopment options through FAR transfers. As I mentioned, there's a lot of FAR potential on this site. And then 4, at the June 14th Historic Landmarks Commission public meeting, Restore Oregon offered its assistance in exploring other options, and examples of other significantly more affordable restoration alternatives were presented that contradict the applicant's estimate. So staff felt the criterion for demolition review were not met. I have 2 slides on this one, but I'll be brief. For the adjustment, it's a little bit more involved because the criterion are, when it speaks to equally or better meeting the purposes of the regulation to be modified, staff reference the Historic Resource Protection Overlay Zone of 445, the Historic Resource Review section of 846, and of course the subsequent demolition review approval criterion. The purpose of all these sections are not equally or better met by the replacement the purpose of all these sections are equally or better met by a replacement building, not a vacant lot. The Blanchet House is specifically cited as having historic significance by virtue of the tenure under the ownership of Mr. Yamaguchi, and perhaps more importantly, by Mr. Yamaguchi's wife, who worked as a midwife in the Asian community. This criterion is not met. The remaining criterion I'll summarize briefly, but essentially by proposing a vacant lot in replacement of a demolished building, it will not better meet the desired character of the area. It will not better meet zoning regulations that speak to the street classifications, such as ground floor windows or active streetscapes. There's concern that the demolition will bring the district below a 50%.
Excuse me. So you've reached your 10-minute mark and you're about 6 seconds over. So I'm going to cut you off and I'm going to allow the other side to have an additional 6 seconds. But we have to make sure everybody has the same amount of time. So thank you very much.
So, Madam President, with the staff report, it's okay if we cut a little bit of slack because they are presenting a recommendation. And I think it's probably critical that they get to the slide at very least that shows what council's options are, please.
My bad. Okay. I, when you tell me 10 minutes, I'm going to hold you to it no matter what. So thank you for that clarification, Lindley, and please continue.
Thanks, Commissioner. I appreciate that. And I apologize for running a little late. I have about 4 more slides, so I'll be brief. So the Blanchet House and the hospitality was made possible by the former Kiernan Building Dirty Duck Tavern on the site because it received demolition approval. So the applicant will go into their presentation for 10 minutes. I'm going to skip this slide because of time. They'll have their 10 minutes and they'll go through it. They obviously felt that approval criteria is met and they'll present that. Summary findings. Staff feels that both the sets of criterion are not met. The Blanchet House of Hospitality, where it is now today, the new one, the Riley House, was made possible after the former Kiernan Building Dirty Duck Tavern on the site received demolition review approval. Key findings of that were that building lacked Asian American heritage. That building also provided a substantial public benefit by its new building replacement. And the Riley House ultimately received Historic Landmarks Commission approval. As submitted in the application, demolition of this resource without a replacement could establish a precedent for demolition based on long deferred maintenance. It would conflict with numerous historic preservation goals and policies, and without it, the hotel's value to the district and ethnic heritage is taken away. So staff report recommends denial of the demolition review, denial of the adjustment review on 2 primary bases. The applicant has not met the burden of proof that demolition would preclude all reasonable economic use of the site. And 2, no replacement building of equal or greater value is proposed for the site or the historic district. And therefore, no public benefit has been established by the proposed demolition of the building. Staff feels all the approval criteria already mentioned are not met. So council options, last slide. Potential paths moving forward. One would be to deny the proposed demolition and adjustment. In this case, a precedent will not have been established for approving a demolition due to lack of maintenance of a historic structure and not exhausting all reasonable economic alternatives to demolition. And the second, approve the proposed demolition and adjustment. Staff would be required to revise their staff report supporting demolition per the direction and subsequent language from City Council. And a precedent will have been established for approving the demolition by lack of maintaining historic structures. So that's the end of my presentation, and I would hand it over to the applicant unless you have any questions.
So before the applicant begins, Commissioner Ryan has joined the call. Commissioner Ryan, the other commissioners have disclosed ex parte contacts, site visits, or conflicts of interest. Do you have anything you would like to add before we move on to the applicant's presentation?
Sure. Thank you, Lindley. Can you all hear me? I feel like the people that testify right now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I did not meet with any interested parties after this application was submitted, but in interest of full disclosure, I did meet with representatives from Blanchet House at the site of the old Blanchet House on December 3rd, 2020, and want that information to be on the record. We walked past the outside of the old site building, discussed the poor condition of the building and Blanchet House's potential proposal to seek demolition of the building on our way to a tour of the new Blanchet House facility. And it was with the executive director and a couple board members. Is that what you needed from me?
Yes, and if
That's all I got.
that's perfect. Thank you, Commissioner Ryan.
Okay.
If any, again, I'm not Commissioner Hardesty, you should feel free to do this as well. But if anybody wants to challenge or question Commissioner Ryan on his disclosure, please raise your hand. And
Or unmute yourself and speak up now. I'm not seeing any hands or anyone speaking but me. So I think we are ready to move on.
Actually,
Thank you.
Madam President, I have a question.
Yes.
This question is for staff. Staff laid out two options today. Basically, one was to accept the proposal, one was to deny the proposal. I'm wondering if there are any other options. For example, could we keep the record open for a week or two while we get public comment? Or
There is a third option, Commissioner Maps, and it is just what you said. If there's a request to keep the public record open for some reason, and we agree to do that, then we will have that third option at the end.
okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. And so we're going to move on now to the applicant's presentation. Is that correct? And they will have 10 minutes.
Thank you. This is Christy White, Land Use Counsel for Blanchet House, and I'm going to introduce Executive Director Scott Kerman, who will be followed by both myself and Dan Petrusich. Scott?
Thank you, Christy. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Scott Kerman, Executive Director of the Blanchet House of Hospitality. What a week it's been. What a year. It feels like since March of 2020, it has been one life-threatening crisis for the housing and food insecure people we serve at Blanchet House. Blanchet House has served to this need no matter the crisis. We owe thanks to our passionate and committed community of volunteers and supporters, a dedicated and skilled staff, and residential program participants who appreciate the role service plays in their recovery. When Blanchet House needs help to meet the crisis in Old Town, our community responds and responds with fervor. And thank goodness they do. We're a small agency. We do not have the size, staff, or funding of many of our cohort organizations. There are only 12 of us working downtown, and every dollar of our over $2 million budget is provided through donations from independent donors and foundations. We are charged with prudently and effectively stewarding these funds in further of our mission and the people we serve. Blanchet House is also grateful for our partnership with the Joint Office, the city and the county, and our colleague human service agencies. This spirit of mutual cooperation, what Commissioner Ryan recently called our collective work to address houselessness, has been essential to meeting the needs of our community this past year. We've seen this collective spirit at work just this past week. Blanchet received bottled water from the Joint Office, and in turn, we donated reusable water bottles, lightweight clothing, and meals to the cooling center located at the OCC. Yes, a lot of factors have come together to make Blanchet House's life-saving services possible this past year. But one element remains that does not get enough credit: our 33,000 square foot facility, which we opened in 2012. None of our service this past year, not the over 500,000 meals we served on site, not the 100,000 meals we prepared for other locations, not the 650,000 pounds of food we rescued, not the clothing, hygiene, and living supplies we handed out, and not the food, clothing, and supplies we redonated to other agencies and programs. None of this would have been possible had we remained in the old Blanchet House. Had we remained in the old building, I have no doubt that we would have closed due to the pandemic. There simply was not sufficient space to operate under COVID conditions, and certainly not at the level the need required. So let us give credit to the City Council, who a decade ago approved our application to replace the Dirty Duck building. Of course, that council could not have foreseen how a decade later, their decision would facilitate our response to a global pandemic. But that council certainly foresaw how an expanded Blanchet House would provide important life-saving services to our community for years to come. They anticipated how in a new facility, Blanchet House would be in a better position to help underserved communities, BIPOC communities, GLBTQ, the elderly, persons with chronic mental and physical disabilities, and immigrant communities. We are not insensitive to the history of Old Town. We are proud of our 70-year history of providing meals, restorative housing, compassion, and hope in the district, serving people of these historic communities who still suffer from transgenerational trauma, discrimination, and poverty. Our vision for the future service includes a nurse-led health clinic that can provide essential healthcare services to this underserved community. Currently, our Harrington Health Clinic occupies only 154 square feet, enough space to provide valuable care to our residents. Our vision is to expand the Harrington Clinic so that patients from outside of Blanchet House can receive preventative, managed, and urgent healthcare services. This is why we come before you today, to imagine with us what we can do for a community devastated by this humanitarian crisis, if given the opportunity to redevelop the old Blanchet House site in a way that is economically feasible and won't threaten our ability to serve our mission. Public health improves when we provide consistent and essential services for the unhoused. Blanchet House stands committed to this effort. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Scott. Christy White, Land Use Counsel for the applicant. The approval criteria for demolition is whether denial of a demolition permit would effectively deprive the owner of all reasonable economic use of the site. The operative terms are all, reasonable, and economic use. The code requires that we use the dictionary definition of these terms because the code does not itself provide a definition. All means all. Reasonable means, quote, not extreme, excessive, being in accordance with reason, not extreme or excessive, accordance with reason. Economic, of, relating to, or based on the production of goods and services. Blanchet looked to known experts in the field to assess whether there was any reasonable economic use of the failing building. The team includes Heritage Consulting, KPFF Engineers, Fortis Construction, Johnson Economics, and Sarah Architecture. Their collective experience on historic buildings is extensive and detailed in the brief. The team found that the level of repair would be extensive. Repoint all exterior masonry wall and parapet joints, replace all damaged, deteriorated, and missing bricks, apply new 6-inch reinforced short creek bearing wall on each side of the masonry wall, new walls, new continuous concrete foundation elements at the basement level, basically build a building inside a building. Replace all wet wood members in the basement and roof structure, among other measures. The city's own 2019 Notice of Dangerous Buildings sent to Blanchet House corroborates these condition findings. The estimated cost of repair is $10.7 million. This cost estimate is comprehensive and includes the hard and soft costs, financing fees, and development fees. This cost of repair was produced by Fortis Construction, the same firm that worked on Pietro Belushi's Oregonian building and the 1908 brewery blocks. Johnson Economics then evaluated the reasonableness of these costs by assuming a maximum development potential, which of course would create the greatest offset to these costs. Johnson found that the lease rate of the finished space would have to be more than double the highest value lease rates in the Pearl. The required lease rate is clearly excessive and certainly not in accordance with reason on this site. Of course, any lesser use would be just less economically reasonable and therefore would also deprive the owner of all reasonable economic use of the site. Blanchet then didn't stop there. They asked Heritage Consulting to reduce this significant cost gap through historic incentives. Heritage Consulting found that a combination of tax credits could not fill the gap, but most notably that the 20% federal income tax credit is of course limited for a number of reasons, but most importantly, to secure that credit, Blanchet House would have to be transferred out of a nonprofit ownership for 5 years after project completion, and then hope to return to nonprofit status after the building was complete. That is a non-starter for the Blanchet House. Several opponents claim that KPFF and Fortis overestimated or inflated the cost of repairs. KPFF and Fortis are reputable firms. They did not overestimate. They provided their estimates only after a professional and comprehensive forensic evaluation of this building. We have met our burden of proof. The cost of repair is beyond all reason and excessive. All the costs and all the offsets or end uses are excessive, and therefore we have satisfied the single approval criteria. I am going to go quickly to the adjustment request. We are requesting approval of the demolition permit before we have a new building permit, as Mr. Herron explained. This request is consistent with the purpose of preserving historic resources. Historic resources on this site are not locked in the failing brick, but instead in the people who have spent their lives in service of other people. from the early Asian American immigrant community to Blanchet. Blanchet itself has operated here for over 70 years, representing well over half of that history. The history will be loudly re-expressed when the Blanchet House is able to vision a new building with expanded services and partnerships on this site. Retaining the falling building increases our financial and safety risk, delays our visioning process, and prevents us from moving forward with plans to continue the historic legacy of care on this site. We cannot plan and we cannot fundraise without assurance that this building can be demolished. We will preserve the history of care through demolition. You can count on it. It is the only reason Blanchet House exists, and they will loudly elevate that history on this site. If any use is mitigation for the loss of these bricks, it is the expanded programming of the critical services offered by the Blanchet House. And in closing, I will pass it over to Dan, but to suggest that Blanchet House has neglected this and therefore led to this conclusion, we have to object. As we shared with the Landmarks Commission, the Blanchet House does not dish up neglect. They dish up food, combat neglect through care and compassion for the least fortunate, and they do it where it's needed most in the heart of old downtown. They're going to continue to spend their charitable contributions on serving those people. I'll pass it over to Dan Petrosich for our closing comments.
Dan Petrosich, I'm Vice President of the Blanchet Board and Chair of the Facilities Committee. My father was a founder and I've served on the board since 2002. During my tenure on the board, the City Council's made significant help to the Blanchet House 3 times. First, when they helped us get the land for the new building. Secondly, when they got us a demo permit for the Dirty Duck. And third, when Nick Fish got us an additional funding for the 4th floor. We're here today to again seek your support. The old Blanchet House has become a safety hazard to the community and extreme liability to our organization. The opposition's asked for a 6-month delay so they can work out a deal with the Blanchet House for the old building. It's financial support from Prosper Portland. PDC had 6 years and to work out a deal in our old building. They had an option to buy it for $1 and they passed. And recently, Prosper Portland put out a request for proposals for their land next to ours. And both respondents had our building coming down. PDC and Prosper Portland have already decided not to dedicate resources to restore the old Blanchet House. Finally, the old Blanchet House is not for sale. Blanchet intends to use the site for our mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. And we will close our comments and save the rest of our time on rebuttal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next we will have the rebuttal to the recommendations from the Bureau.
I think supporters of the applicant, President.
Okay, supporters of the applicants will each have 3 minutes apiece. Megan, do we have people signed up in support of the applicant?
Yes, we do. So I'll just do 3 at a time and read those off as we go.
Thank you.
So thank you. The first is James O'Hanlon. Next is Edwin O'Hanlon. And third, Joe Pinzone.
Welcome.
Go ahead, bud. My name is Jim O'Hanlon, and I joined the Blanchet Club in 1948 as a sophomore at the University of Portland. The club was purely social in nature until Father Francis Kennard became our chaplain. Father Kennard, as a seminarian, had studied the works of the Catholic worker and Dorothy Day in starting and operating houses of hospitality in New York City. He convinced the club to start a house of hospitality and started looking for a place to rent. By chance, while walking in the old town, he ran into Tom Johnson at the corner of 4th and Gleason. He said he was the owner of the building and which building had no name and would rent the first floor for 1 year for $35 a month. The offer was accepted. Blanchet then spent roughly 2 years cleaning and figuring out how to operate the House of Hospitality. It opened on February 11th, 1952. In a year later, Blanchet rented the second floor and for the same price of $35 per month. In 1956, Tom Johnson offered to sell the building for $24,000. The club knew the building was old and run down, but the price was right. So we accepted his offer and purchased the building. Over the years, Blanchet has made no improvements to the building, but the building has seen its day, has deteriorated, and should be torn down and dismissed and right, torn down and demolished. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Edwin O'Hanlon.
My name is Edwin O'Hanlon, and that was my father. I grew up with Blanchet. I attended Saturday morning meetings with the board. They had mass and meetings. I learned to argue there. I served in the line. I used to hand out $5 bills on Christmas. So it's been in our blood. I was humbled and excited to join the board and follow in the footsteps of my father and the other founders. I was treasurer of the organization for about 20 years and recently retired. The organization operated on a tight budget for all these years. It relies on donations from the community. For years, it just raised money based on 4 quarterly newsletters that were only a page. And the budget was probably around $250,000. It never took federal, state, or city funds, except for a small YCAP grant, until the city stepped up and added a floor to our new building. Blanchet has fed more meals than any other organization in the city at no cost to the government and with little fanfare or thanks. Blanchet did not seek any attention. It just relied on the grace of God for every dollar it received. And they tried to make sure that everyone knew that every dollar they received was going into the program. Blanchet relies heavily on donated services and food. The board never had employees while my dad was and his cohorts were in charge. It was blessed with a dedicated director who ran the place for over 40 years. The men in the house provided the meals and made necessary repairs. Volunteers often helped with maintenance and served the meals out. Outside contractors were hired as necessary for repairs. For example, Dan Petrus's dad redid the floors in the building when they first bought it. The building was maintained, but was never in great shape. It was always kept functional, not fancy. The new board hired the first executive director who saw the building and the men in the program. We instituted a facilities committee to monitor the new and the old building. The new board realized when we took over that the old building would not be sufficient in its condition to continue our mission for the next 60 years. That was our goal, to help go for another 60 years. We looked for a solution. A new building was the answer. And as part of that deal, we thought the city would take possession of the property. Now the old building should be demolished. Thanks. Thanks for hearing us.
Thank you. Please, excuse me, if you're not speaking, please put your phone on mute. Thank you. Who's next?
Next, we have Joe Pinzone.
Joe, looks like you're back on mute again.
These calls, I tell you. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Pinzone, and I am a principal at Sarah Architects and a past Clark County Historic Preservation Commissioner. I'm testifying here today in support of Blanchet's request for approval of a demolition permit. I sat here over 10 years ago in front of this council when it took the courageous action to approve Blanchet's original request. Then, as now, BDS staff and the HLC, the Historic Landmarks Commission, stood in opposition using most of the same arguments. In 2010, it was stated that the district's integrity would be compromised and could potentially be delisted. It hasn't and won't. The district maintains nearly 90% of its original contributing resources. Interestingly, in describing the district, the NPS National Park Service website describes 6 important buildings and many important cultural aspects of this district, none of which actually give reference to this building. Now, HLC states that no public benefit has been established. I'm sorry, but you have to look at what Blanchet has provided this city since it was built in its new building. In addition, in light of recent events, there is a definite public benefit in removing buildings that have been identified, or in this case, designated and recognized as dangerous by engineering professionals and BDS. They state a solution could be found to save the building given more time. I should like to say the first pre-application hearing with the city was over 29 months ago, which is more than sufficient time to offer one or find one. Meanwhile, the building continues to deteriorate and the danger to the public grows. HLC states the estimate for repair is extraordinarily high and that the commission members have completed renovations of similar projects, similar types, and in similar condition for less. Perhaps, but were those projects of the same scale? For example, let's say an existing building needs a new elevator that costs $200,000. If building A is a 2-story city block, that equates to 80,000 square feet. Fast math says that tells you the elevator costs $2.50 a square foot for that building. If building B is a 10,000 square foot building, like Blanchet, then the cost is $20 a square foot, 8 times more expensive per square foot for the same piece of equipment. I believe this council is also aware that construction costs have been skyrocketing over the past 4 years. What seems extraordinarily high to the HLC is born out of the extremely small size of the old Blanchet building, coupled with today's construction climate. In summary, I would like to ask that the council not give in to pressure and see the plethora of public benefits that will ensue with approving this request. The district will not be corrupted or delisted. There is a public benefit, especially to those that camp and use the sidewalks around the building. The renovation repairs necessary to return the building to a viable use are just not economically feasible. Lastly, if the demolition request would not have been approved, in my opinion, that Blanchet would not exist today. All the meals served, the mental health services offered, the food and clothes donated, and all the other services that Blanchet provides the city, citizens of the city free of charge would not have happened. I hope this council sees the many benefits of approving this proposal will bring. Thank you for your time and consideration.
All right, next we have Jim Christensen, Father Gary Smith, and John McWiggin.
Hi, my name is Jim Christensen. I am also a son of a founder like the previous speaker, Ed O'Hanlon. I come at this from a practical standpoint. I just want to give you in 2 or 3 minutes what I can as my life experience with not only the Blanchet program, but the building itself. I, as a very young boy, had the opportunity to walk in there. My dad, Dan Christensen, was one of the founders in 1952. I have a very early recollection of going into that building, and when I hear the year 1989, that building was in good condition, all I can say is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I walked into that as a very young boy in the early 60s, and I can tell you in my mind, the snapshot is, this is a really old building. I walked through the old swinging wooden creaky door on the side of that building into the cafeteria where we now feed. We did at that point feed people in the old building. It was old then, and it remained that way. Fast forward 20 years later, and in about 1990, I became the newest and the youngest member on the board. We looked at that building at that time, and we knew in the 90s, the old board, the original members being a part of that still, looked to replace the program with the new building, because we knew that the shelf life on that building was expiring. So this is 30 plus years ago. We knew that building was not going to survive at least over the next 10 or 15 years if we didn't have some foresight to change. So they decided, and they looked around, they could not find a place. Fast forward another 10 years, I became a member with what then was a newly constituted board. We did the exact same thing. We looked for buildings in the neighborhood. Nothing popped up. We looked at remodeling. The cost of that in each of those cases was exorbitant. We looked at it. It just didn't make any sense. It didn't make sense in the 90s. It didn't make sense 10 or 15 years later. And that's why we ended up with the new building that we have. It is stroke of luck that we were able to get a bigger footprint thanks to the ability to an old building, the aforementioned Dirty Duck. It turned out to be a blessing, not only for the Blanchet House, but to the city of Portland, and more importantly, to those that are homeless in our city today. It's a great example of what we can do when we have the foresight to make the practical and reasonable solution, which is sometimes to tear down these old buildings. Quite frankly, it's a huge liability. It's not only just aging, but it's about to disintegrate. I hope that the city council will see that we have made a great opportunity happen in the first go round. All we're asking is a chance to do it again and a way to help the homeless in this time of great need. I thank you for your time.
Next, Father Gary Smith.
I've been texting with Father Gary. He's having trouble hearing the hearing, so I don't believe, unless we hear his voice in the next 5 seconds, that he'll be able to testify.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me now. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I've been battling technology here in my little room and finally succeeded in some way. Greetings to all of you.
Greetings.
I've been around Old Town since the 90s, connected with St. Andre's, with Sisters, with Street Roots, with Blanchet. I'm a chaplain at the county jail on 1 day a week. So I've been around that whole area for such a long time. I think this is really something that's very special to me. That building has been an eyesore for so long. With all the suggestions of trying to get it fixed up, nothing has come forward. It's really ugly, and it's ugly for the street folks that have to live their life around there. So it would be great just to remove it. But secondly, I think Blanchet has in mind not just to remove it, but to build something that would be constructed by way of healthcare for the people of the neighborhood. And I think Old Town needs something like that. Having dealt with so many people that are sick and the SROs on the streets, they need access to a place like that's available with people who are running the program, who know how to run a program. So I really recommend the demolition for all the reasons I've said. Thank you.
John McWigan.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is John McWigan. I'm a retired lawyer. I practiced business and corporate law for 40 years with the Black Culture Line firm in Portland. I served as a Blanchet board member for 15 years between 2006 and 2020 and was president of the board for a term after opening of the new building. Opponents of the demolition of the old Blanchet building are suggesting that a delay in approving a demo permit for the old building will somehow likely result in Prosper Portland or a similar public or quasi-public agency stepping up to lead and help finance a seismic and structural rehab of the old Blanchet building. Some historical perspective is relevant here. I was closely involved for Blanchet in all contractual and legal aspects of Blanchet's dealings with the city of Portland and related agencies around the funding and construction of the new Blanchet building, which is 310 Northwest Gleason, next door to the building we're discussing today, which Blanchet completed and occupied in 2012. Under the so-called DDA agreement signed by Blanchet and Portland Development Commission in 2008, PDC had the right to acquire ownership of the old Blanchet building for $1, basically free of charge. In 2011, that $1 acquisition right in favor of PDC was formalized in a purchase option agreement. That option was set to expire on December 31, 2013. In fall of 2013, at PDC's request, for no additional consideration, Blanchet agreed to extend the expiration date of the option to June 30, 2014. After the extended option expired, PDC and Blanchet continued to negotiate for a further extension of the option, or alternatively, a lease of the old Blanchet building to PDC. In the end, PDC was not willing to pay or assume any costs or liabilities associated with maintaining the old building, so no further option or leases occurred. Since Blanchet vacated the old building in 2012, Blanchet has continued to pay 100% of the property taxes and maintenance costs associated with the old building. Looking back, the city and related agencies had 6 years, 2008 to 2014, to lead an effort and funding for rehab or redevelopment of the old Blanchet building and acquire ownership of that building for $1. That never occurred. Based on that history, there is no reasonable likelihood that within the next 6 months or any longer period, that the city or any of its related agencies will lead or fund an effort to seismically and structurally rehab the old Blanchet building. Thank you for your time.
Next, we have Rich Ulrich and Thompson Fowler.
Here.
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Rich Ulrich. I've been a member of the Blanchet House Board of Directors since 2002. I served as president from April of 2008. During that time, we raised $13.2 million, completed the construction of this new building, and then moved in September of 2012.
Excuse me, Rich.
Yes.
We're getting a lot of feedback from your testimony. Are you, can you move where you're talking from?
All right. Is that better?
Not yet. Let's try it.
I have, like many of our board members, I have a relationship with one of the founders, my father-in-law, Dan Harrington.
So excuse me, Rich. I'm going to ask.
I'm in Minnesota at a cottage. I'm trying very hard to.
Lucky you. I'm going to ask you, maybe if you would hang up and dial back in, you'll get a better connection. I'll go to the next speaker and we will certainly make sure you get on.
Here's the thing, on my calling, I do not have the calling. I have the ID for the meeting, but I don't have an ID for the call.
Megan, would you connect with Rich and make sure he has what he needs to be able to call back in?
Yes, I can do that. Rich, I'll reach out to you.
Try Rich Ulrich.
We got you, Rich. And who was next, Megan?
We have Thompson Fowler.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine, thank you.
Great. I've been a member of the board of directors for the Blanchet House since 1989. The Blanchet House board does not come at this application for demolition of the building lightly. We understand the difficulty of this process, the result and the rigor with which this application will be tested. We've investigated all reasonable ways in which we could possibly bridge the very large gap between what it would cost to make this building safe, habitable, and leasable. We asked Heritage Consulting, as was previously mentioned, to review all of the tax programs to see how we could maximize the credits. We sought the advice of contractors to give us reasonable estimates of the work that would need to be done to make the building safe and leasable, or at least usable. We asked an economic expert to evaluate the market to see if the end product would be of interest to another developer. None of the answers came back positive. The tax analysis, credit analysis tells us we would lose our 501c3 status in order to qualify for one of the credits, which of course we cannot entertain, and the remainder of the credits are not near enough to bridge the nearly $8 million gap. The economics of rehab and reuse are completely upside down and lead to the untenable and highly unreasonable conclusion that these rates in the building would have to be well above those in the Pearl to make this deal even minimally feasible. That, of course, would not be at all reasonable and objectively excessive, and there was no interest whatsoever from the development community to retain the building. We believe that we have met our burden of proof on this application, and in this unique circumstance, we are asking you, the members of the City Council, to support the Blanchet House and permit demolition. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Were we able to get our other testimony back on the phone, Megan?
I see Rich on. Let me see. Hi, Rich. Are you able to unmute yourself and try again? I'm still working on sending you the email as well.
You might, I've tried to do this by phone.
Oh, you're perfect. You're perfect.
Is that better?
Rich. Yes,
Okay,
we can
good.
hear you well.
Okay. Again, where I left off was at this 100-year-old building we were recommending to be demolished had 3 floors in which 3 to 4 men were sometimes living in the same room. There were 3 toilets in the entire building for the 28 men who resided there and only 2 showers. The dining room could seat 41 at a time, and there weren't any accommodations for guests with disabilities. If you have been to our old house on 4th and Gleason, you will see a dilapidated structure with bricks and mortar missing. The structure is surrounded by fencing to protect anyone walking by the property for the possibility of falling bricks. As a member of the insurance industry, I'm a 40-year State Farm agent. I'm concerned about the liability exposure the Blanchet continues to face, even with the protective fencing around the old house. As we focus on finances for this soon-to-be 70-year-old nonprofit, I think about the continued cost to pay for the liability insurance, maintaining the property, and that could be used for much-needed programs for the people in need whom we serve. I also am concerned that there's a real possibility that we may see the liability protection we currently have in place be non-renewed because of the condition of the 4th and Gleason building. As a former president, my recollection at the time before the construction began was that once the building was completed, the city would take over the ownership of the 4th and Gleason property. That obviously has not happened. That has not taken place. We all know the importance of the Blanchet mission. If you have served at our facility, particularly during the pandemic, you know that we have been committed to our mission during these difficult times to serve the city. Our executive director, Scott Kerman, his staff, and our wonderful volunteers have been outstanding. Our humble founders left us the instructions to feed the poor, provide clothing for those in need, and a safe haven for those with addiction and those who are homeless. We have done our part. Now it is time for the city to do theirs, to take this responsibility off our shoulders. Remove the liability exposure for Blanchet. Remove the expenses for insurance and maintenance from Blanchet. And my recommendation, as I recall what happened in 1980 over in Berlin, commissioners and mayor of Portland, tear this building down. We need to remove this structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe that concludes the testimony in support of the appellant. Next, we're going to hear from the Historic Landmarks Commission, and they will have 5 minutes to present.
Excuse me, Commissioner, I believe we had one more person signed up to testify, Emily Harrington of the Harrington Health Clinic. Was she not registered as a testifier?
Megan?
It looks like Emily is not currently on the call.
Emily's been on here from the beginning. I've been looking at her the whole time. I just haven't, I didn't see her on the list for a testimony. Emily, feel free to provide testimony now.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Good afternoon. My name is Emily Harrington. I've been a Blanchet House board member since 2013. I am also the founder of the Harrington Health Clinic, a nurse-led primary care clinic that resides within the Blanchet House of Hospitality. My time today is limited, and yet I am still inclined to share with you that at the very top of the agenda of my first ever board meeting 8 years ago was the topic of respectfully caring for the old Blanchet building. Time has passed, but our intentions continue to be based in respect, thoughtfulness, and mission impact. And here we are today, deciding and hopefully repurposing the building state in a meaningful way that addresses Portland's underserved communities. This is most critical to me. As a nurse, I hold certifications in family practice and psychiatric mental health care. I've been given the privilege of caring for people in a way that is referred to as womb to tomb, as well as being charged with caring for the most mentally tormented individuals in our community. I will begin by saying that stories matter. Miss Yamaguchi's story matters. The stories of Portland's houseless matter also. The relationship between houselessness and health can be one of despair or one of potential for our city. Houselessness is a public health crisis. This you are all too keenly aware of. In Portland, nearly 5 in every 1,000 individuals is houseless. Houselessness drives poor health, and poor health drives houselessness. But this cycle can be disrupted. Innovative solutions, collaborative partnerships, and alternative models of care can increase accessible, quality care, thereby providing a path forward. In recognizing that the transformation of lives relies upon physical, emotional, and spiritual wellness, the Harrington Health Clinic was formed in partnership with the University of Portland and Volunteers of America. The clinic was designed utilizing an evidence-based model to improve quality care, incorporating on-site nursing, palliative care, telemedicine, and mental health services. This clinic is designed to improve the health of our vulnerable population and address healthcare costs, access, and satisfaction. This clinic is the first academically affiliated, nurse-owned, female-led clinic in our state. Despite our meager 154 square feet of clinic space, in our inaugural year, we have celebrated over 200 patient encounters. We have partnered with Multnomah County to host 2 COVID-19 vaccine clinics and are primed to host regular foot care clinics for the Old Town community later this summer. These are stories that matter. How better to honor the story of Miss Yamaguchi, a midwife, a visionary, a champion of Portland's vulnerable, than to continue her legacy through the care and services provided by our clinic, and to do so in the spirit of true competition, which is not to strive against, but to strive together to improve the health and wellness of Portland's houseless population. The ultimate task of a midwife is one of deliverance, of ushering individuals from one realm to the next, to be privy to new beginnings. I would like to believe that the efforts of the Harrington Health Clinic are analogous to this, a transference from invisible to visible, from broken to mended, from unwell to rehabilitated. Yes, we should recognize and preserve Old Town's history and heritage, but we must also put in place timely and relevant services that will benefit our significantly underserved community for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And now we will hear from the Historic Landmarks Commission, and they will have 5 minutes for their testimony. Welcome.
Thank you so much, City Council members. I'm here along with my Vice Chair, Maya Foti, to deliver the Landmarks Commission's recommendations, which is for denial of this application. Historic districts are very different from individual historic buildings. A district tells a story about a place and the people and events who lived there. Yes, it is a collection of buildings, but it's also those buildings' relationship to each other that tells the story. And quite often the buildings in a district, especially a cultural district like this one, aren't that architecturally distinctive. But together they are more impactful than any single building could be. The applicant's consultants want you to focus in on just this one building, shutting out any discussion of the district. But that's not the way review works in a historic district, which is in itself the historic resource. So if the building is just a component of a resource, you're probably thinking, do we need this specific building to represent the story of Chinese and Japanese immigrants? The answer is that we're not sure how many hits this district can still take. All it would take is one persuasive delisting application to point out that this building would be the 4th loss in the small district since 1990. The district is tenuous. It has been since it actually was listed. There have been 2 recent delistings in Portland in the last year and a half. So maybe you're thinking, how many people of Japanese or Chinese ancestry really care or identify with this building, or even with this district? You'll hear some about that in testimony today, but I just want to remind you that the history of underrepresented groups makes us all richer. We need to hear the internment stories as well as about the heroes who lived here, like Minoru Yasui. This is our only cultural district in Portland. My commission has asked City Council before to just be honest about your intentions for this district. If you intend to not support it, then be courageous enough to admit it. Be courageous enough to stand up and take the heat if we lose it. Prosper Portland claims not to be involved, and Blanchet House says the same, but there are possible development scenarios. You saw one showed by city staff initially that are, in their words, unencumbered by this building. Does anyone really think that Prosper won't develop this property once this building is gone? Finally, a few thoughts on mitigation. The applicant's consultants want you to focus on some new uses that they say will happen on the property. Sounds awesome. You can count on it, they say. Well, that's not how land use decisions work. Unfortunately, promises for mitigation involving the upkeep and rehab of this very building were made and broken after the Kiernan building was demolished. Things happen. Developers might think they will do something and then the deal falls apart, or there's an act of God. Look at Emmanuel Hospital with empty lots that once were people's homes. How does it feel to remember what was there and think, for what? The precedent that would be set by allowing demolition without an approved replacement is extremely alarming. Do not allow our code and the very concept of mitigation to be undermined. I'd like to leave you with one quote from our Comprehensive Plan 2035, and this is Policy 4.50 Demolition. Quote, protect historic resources from demolition. When demolition is necessary or appropriate, provide opportunities for public comment and encourage pursuit of alternatives to demolition or other actions that mitigate for the loss. Thank you for hearing us. Maya Fodi, our Vice Chair, has some last comments. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maya Fodi, Vice Chair. I'll be quick. I just wanted to reiterate that I'm speaking to the structural issues is the Yamaguchi Hotel is at no greater risk of being a dangerous building because of its URM construction than the 1,650 other URM buildings in the city of Portland. The yellow tag referenced in the letters is for damaged parapet and loose brick, which are easily repairable items. Additionally, the building would not have leaked if the roof had been properly maintained, an expectation the city has of all building owners. I'd like to reiterate again that the building fell into disrepair under current ownership in the last 8 years. This is called demolition by neglect, and as you can see, it works. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will hear from opponents of the applicant. Again, opponents will have 3 minutes each. Megan, would you call the first 3 people, please?
Yes, first up, Carrie Richer, Peggy Moretti, and Jessica Engman.
Good afternoon, Madam President and Commissioners. My name is Carrie Richter. I am a land use attorney who served on the Portland Landmarks Commission at the time that the Kiernan building demolition and subsequently when the new Riley House was approved. The Kiernan building demolition review required the balancing of public policies between what exists and what is proposed. That is not what the applicant is asking for today. They are asking for something much more narrow. They're asking that the obligation is they have to show the applicant that the denial of a demolition permit would deprive the owner of all reasonable economic use. Yet the applicant's focus has transitioned away from economics into the balancing of virtues, the services provided by the Blanchet House, the proposed nursing clinic, the need for such a clinic, the need for these services in the district. These inquiries are not relevant to the reasonable economic use criterion. In order for the Blanchet House to proceed in this direction, this application needs to be withdrawn and filed under criterion C2. As I think one of the proponents testified, the city did it once. We have an opportunity to do it again. If that's the direction that the city wishes to go, it needs to go through criterion C2 and not a reasonable economic use analysis. In a letter dated June 28th, the applicant's attorney says, if there is a reasonable economic solution, we pursue that solution before demolishing the structure. The applicant has failed to bear its burden to show that it has exhausted all of the options short of demolition. For example, the rehabilitation costs are not limited to the very minimum necessary to make the building usable, rather than Cadillac level restoration expenditures. Second, there's no land value appraisals, either with the existing building or a vacant site. To what extent does a smaller 2,500 square foot site constrain the value? Mr. Petrovich discussed the cost of an elevator to a bigger building are less because of the function of the scale. That is a problem for the size of the site, not the building itself. Third, there are no details on the proposed nursing clinic development. What would the cost of constructing a new nursing clinic be compared to the cost of locating that clinic in a restored Yamaguchi hotel? The testimony was that construction costs have skyrocketed. That means that they need to compare the cost to construct new if those costs have skyrocketed. Fourth, no effort to explain what the owner did to protect and keep the resource in a usable condition. Fifth, no attempt to market or lease the property as a way to offset carrying costs. A building setting fallow for 8 years does not establish that these efforts were pursued. With respect to the adjustment, no matter how deserving an applicant, that merit alone cannot allow further displacement and erasing of collective memory by crossing our fingers and hoping for the best. During the Blanchet House and Riley House review, when Blanchet House was able to comply with the Riley House, they were able to comply with the obligation to secure a new construction permit first. They were able to comply with the obligation that they are seeking an adjustment for now. There is no reason to apply a different standard 10 years later. There is an opportunity here to redevelop a three-quarter block site if there were some mitigation proposed, a two-wall solution, somehow building back the collective memory into this key development project. But the applicant has not shown that they've even tried that option. There isn't any evidence in the record. Please don't allow erasing a collective memory with the hopes that something better will come along. We've made that mistake before and we shouldn't do it again. For these reasons, I urge you to deny the demolition request as well as the adjustment. Thank you.
Peggy Moretti.
Hello, is everybody able to hear me? Thank you. I'm Peggy Moretti, representing Restore Oregon. Our mission is to preserve, reuse, and pass forward the places that reflect Oregon's diverse cultural heritage and that make our communities vibrant, inclusive, and sustainable. We strongly oppose this demolition and fully support the findings of the Bureau of Development Services. We've submitted more detailed statements in writing, so I'm going to attempt to net down our remarks for the time allowed here. City Council should deny this demolition permit because of the building's extreme rarity and deep connection to the Japanese American and AAPI community, because of its connection to the untold and underappreciated chapter of Oregon women's history and midwifery, and because of its social services history. The application should also be denied by the city because it must not reward demolition by neglect. While understanding the desire to focus on their core mission, the applicant did not, in fact, maintain this building and did not attempt to sell it to someone who could. It would set a precedent for more demolitions. There are many similar examples of demolition by neglect going on in the historic district and across the city. Those owners are watching. It would undermine the city's own policies. To approve a demolition with no approved replacement is bad stewardship. There's absolutely no guarantee that anything would replace the Yamaguchi Hotel other than another vacant lot. The applicant should play by the rules when they're proposing to remove such a significant piece of history. But we've all been put in a very uncomfortable position, and I'm greatly bothered by the premise that there needs to be a loser here, that one good and important purpose must be sacrificed for another good and important purpose. We appreciate beyond measure the work of the Blanchet House and their vision to provide nursing services. We do not, however, believe all options have been explored. So we ask two things of the city today. One, deny the demolition application, and two, provide resources to explore alternatives. As it has been stated, the city played a very significant role in arriving at this state of affairs. The original deal orchestrated by the PDC, now Prosper Portland, was essentially a property swap. Sacrifice the historic Kiernan building to build a new Blanchet House, but save the old Blanchet House. The PDC then left Blanchet holding the bag by not executing their option to take ownership of the old building after the new facility was built. Surely they knew what the consequences would be. Restore Oregon and several of our members have offered to help find an alternate win-win solution that could retain and incorporate the Yamaguchi Hotel's important and untold stories into future development on the block. Development that well may include space for nursing services. But the city needs to participate in this effort. Walk the talk of
Thank you,
respecting
Peggy.
and preserving cultural heritage and put resources towards a better outcome.
If they excuse me. Thank you, Peggy. Your time's up.
Jessica Engman.
Hello, my name is Jessica Ingeman. I'm a development project manager and a historic preservation specialist and former landmarks commissioner. I've worked on numerous historic rehabilitation projects in Portland. 3 you might be familiar with include the Ladd Carriage House, University of Oregon's White Stag Block, and Washington High School, also known as Revolution Hall. I've worked on projects large and small, complex and straightforward, and evaluating the challenges and opportunities of reusing historic buildings is what I've done day in and day out for the last 17 years. I'm speaking today out of concern that this demolition application for a building with important Japanese American history is being rushed and that alternatives haven't been fully explored. Hearing that the applicant obtained construction pricing reaching more than $1,300 per square foot is a huge red flag for me. This number is far and above any cost figure I have ever seen on a historic project, and any claims around economic infeasibility really need to be questioned if that is the figure upon which the applicant is basing their claims. Certainly, this is a small building in disrepair, and cost per square foot will trend higher than larger rehabs that have the benefit of economies of scale. But in my experience, it does not cost $1,300 a square foot to seismically upgrade and rehab a historic URM building. My second concern is around the fact that the applicant appears to have a use in mind for the site. And as Carrie Richter pointed out, if that is the case, this application should be processed under C2, where the benefits of that use can be balanced against the loss of the historic resource. Lastly, I will end by stating that the adjustment request is of highest concern. If the historic building is to be demolished, we must absolutely know what is replacing it and that that project is permitted and will go forward. We cannot drag down our central city with another vacant lot and no certainty of a replacement building. We saw what a mistake that was in the urban renewal era. On a positive note, the preservation community is eager to help find creative alternatives and to retain this historic resource. I hope that council will encourage the applicant to seek a development solution that retains the Yamaguchi Hotel. Thank you.
Next, we have Rick Michelson, Karen Carlson, and John Liu.
And just before they start, colleagues, I think after these 3, we'll take a short 10-minute break so people can get blood circulating, and we'll come back and conclude. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Rick Michelson. I've been working on historic preservation projects and policy in Portland for the last 40 years. It was on the Planning Commission when the code section that you were reviewing was adopted. I'm presently an advisor to the National Trust from Oregon, and we are, as the preservation movement, moving to recognize cultural importance of places rather than just their physical aspects. The Blanchet House is clearly a building that qualifies in its architecture, but the loss of it is much more of a loss about the cultural history of the city for a underrepresented group, and it deserves honor and culture and savings. I believe the applicant misunderstands the approval criteria and the request should be denied because they are not addressing the approval criteria. If I read from Christy White's letter on June 28th, she says the commenters may have worked on other projects, but they not projects were, as far as we could tell, to be reused by the nonprofit owner for a nursing clinic rather than created office space. The proposed use of the as a nursing clinic showing the project is unfeasible is not relevant because other options have not been examined appropriately. It misses the point entirely. The finding is whether or not there is an economically viable way to reuse the building. As some have mentioned, really the appropriate thing is to reapply under criteria 2 so we can judge the merits of this versus other options of the site. Criteria 2 allows us to consider mitigation and ways to make up for the loss of the building. A decision could be conditioned on preserving the building facade, deconstruction and saving important building elements, limiting the size of future buildings on the site, installing exhibition panels, or any of the above. Approving of the demolition without exploring any options and without regarding any mitigation would be a missed opportunity for creating a better Portland. One of the obvious options would be for Prosper Portland to trade this property for the land that's between it and the present Blanchet House. Then Blanchet House could expand and build their clinic on an unencumbered piece of land, and Prosper Portland and we could work to preserve this building or commemorate it in an appropriate way. In sum, I ask you to deny this application as presented, and if they want to use the criteria, including their new proposed use, they need to resubmit the application. This is a process that drives people apart. Right? It's not really conducive for good historic preservation. What's needed is leadership on the city's part to bring everybody together to see what's a reasonable outcome here, whether the reasonable outcome is saving the building, saving one window of the building, or commemorating in some other way. That process needs to be undertaken with the leadership of the city. Thank you.
Karen Carlson.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Karen Carlson. I'm a preservation developer that has taken on some small and tough little projects. And in this case, although I cannot speak to the redevelopment of this building, I can point out a few things that I think have already been said, but I'd just like to add. 10 years ago, the Blanchet House was given a quarter block site and financing to build this new building. And in exchange, PDC was given an option to purchase the old building for $1. On the new site, the Kiernan building was approved to be demolished, and this new building was built. It sounded like a very good deal all around. But PDC did not exercise that option. I don't know why. Maybe they never intended to. But I don't believe that the city council that approved the demolition of the Kiernan building expected that the old Blanchet House would be left vacant to deteriorate with no effort to explore options to save it. And so today, 10 years later, a request is being made to this city council to demolish the Blanchet House. You know, this shouldn't be down to just two options: demolish the building or don't demolish it and watch it deteriorate even more. And it shouldn't be preservation or support the homeless. It can be both of those. And don't reward doing nothing for the last 10 years. Step forward. I asked the city council to deny the demolition, but also to direct Prosper Portland to work with the Blanchet House and the preservation developers to look at alternatives. Thank you.
And John Liu.
John, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
I can. Thank
Sorry,
you.
I apologize about that. My name is John Liu. That's spelled L-I-U. I'm on the board of the AHC and Restore, and I chair the Portland Coalition for Historic Resources. I'm testifying in my personal capacity. So as you guys know, the Chinatown Japantown Historic District is very special. I happen to be Chinese. It's pretty special to me. So at one point, Chinese were 12% of Portland's population. We had the second largest Chinatown on the West Coast. But starting in 1870, this state drove out Chinese people. Chinese were expelled from cities. In one case, they were massacred. By 1882, there are laws prohibiting Chinese from entering, from having housing or going to school, from voting and holding office. And by 1950, almost 80%, 80 of Chinese previous population was gone. So while eliminating Chinese population, Oregon decided to substitute Japanese as imported Oriental labor. So Japantown, Portland started around 1890. And eventually the Japanese population started being suppressed as well. And then of course in 1942, Japantown was depopulated when the residents were sent to the internment camps. So today, Portland's Chinatown, Japantown is the only historic district in our city that's focused on a cultural history. And this tiny historic district, it's 10 blocks, and is under enormous development pressure. And so that's why we're here today. The Yamaguchi Hotel, we call it the Blanchet House, but its importance is that it's the Yamaguchi Hotel, is one of the rarest types of buildings in Portland. It's a surviving building from the early Japanese immigrant community pre-internment. And so I'm asking the council to show that you value this historic district and to follow the Bureau's recommendation and deny the demolition request. You know, the staff has explained to you and other people have kind of elaborated that the question here isn't really if the Blanchet organization can find a economically feasible use by themselves of the property. The question is if there's any economically feasible use by anyone, and that most definitely has not been explored. So that should be explored. And city code requires that before you consider demolishing this property, that you know with certainty what will replace it. There's been some kind of hand waving about what might replace it, but you don't know, and we'll never know. So in my hope is that over time, we're gonna, in the city, see more historic districts devoted to cultural communities, right? 90 buildings important to our African-American history were designated just last year. 4 of them have been demolished since then. But those could be the start of such a district, a cultural district. But approving the demolition of this building would be a really bad start to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we are going to, for the sake of all of our mental health, take a 10-minute break. My clock says it is 3:36. We will be back at 3:46. Megan, would you please turn off the recording? Thank you.
Yes, it's been paused.
Thank you. We'll be back in 10 minutes. wanted to stop at the, oh wait, so Megan, we have additional folks to testify here. Is that correct?
Yes, it looks like we have 8 more individuals on the call.
Okay, let's continue public testimony. I see Commissioner Maps has rejoined us.
Okay, great. First, we have Denise McGriff, then Lawrence Kajaku, and Joselle Wilson.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Denise McGriff, and I am president of the Bosco Milligan Foundation, and you know us as the owners and operators of the Architectural Heritage Center. For the record, we are a 501c3, and about 25 to 30 years ago, we rehabilitated and restored a very dilapidated building in what was then the city of East Portland. I wish that you could see me on screen because, of course, on Zoom, I decided to get all dressed up today because I was going to be testifying before you. And I'm wearing my Saving Places t-shirt, which I'd hoped you'd be able to see. But nevertheless, I want you to know that our organization is asking you to uphold the decision of the staff and the Landmarks Commission to deny the demolition permit and also the adjustment. The new Chinatown, Japantown Historic District is the only BIPOC cultural district in the city. The Yamaguchi Hotel is an important component in this National Register districts, and its removal sends a strong message to the BIPOC community that our sites are not important. Our Asian American history should not be erased by a death by 1,000 cuts. The real shame is that the classic case of demolition by neglect has been plaguing this building for many, many years. I hope that you will give options and time to do a win-win scenario. As you are all aware, the Bosco Milligan Foundation, through its Architectural Heritage Center, has a long history of documenting and assisting in the designation of BIPOC sites in Portland. We feel that part of the solution is to save this important cultural resource and to allow for time to do that. I also want you to know that, for the record, along with Rick Michelson, I am also an advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and I'm also a representative from the state of Oregon to the trust as a member of the Black Advisors of Color. It is important to me as a BIPOC member that other BIPOC sites be recognized and saved in our city, because once they're gone, they are gone, and we can never bring that history back. And as you know, we've spent many, many years erasing our history, and now it's the time to put a stop to that and save it. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate your consideration.
Next, we have Lawrence Kajaku, who will actually be sharing their screen.
Am I visible?
No.
Am I visible?
Not yet.
Well, I'll begin and maybe I'll get
Megan can help.
Lawrence, you should have an option to start your video. Do you see that on your device?
Sorry.
There we go.
Okay. I'm Larry Kajaku on the Architectural Heritage Center board. Not demolishing the Yamaguchi Hotel would help prevent delisting this fragile historic district from the National Register, and it would save a rare survivor of the history of the Japanese in Portland. Most importantly, it housed a hotel. Next door was another hotel that's now been demolished that was operated by the Nita family. Operating hotels was the primary business activity of the Japanese in Portland before World War II. By 1925, there were over 100 Japanese-run hotels in the city. This 1914 photo shows the Japanese who ran a 200-room hotel near the Hawthorne Bridge. We don't know exactly how long the Yamaguchis managed the hotel, since leases are not archived like property ownership records. The 1923 Alien Land Law prohibited land ownership by any person ineligible for citizenship applied to all Asian immigrants, it was clearly targeted at Japanese and explains why there are not more recorded Japanese-owned buildings in this historic district. After Pearl Harbor, all West Coast ethnic Japanese, both immigrants and US citizens, including my parents, were ordered to leave their homes, schools, and businesses to be incarcerated for an indefinite period. Here, the local head of the Wartime Civil Control Administration proudly claims by noon next Tuesday, Portland will be the first city in the nation completely evacuated of Japanese. Portland's ethnic Japanese were initially confined in hastily converted stalls in the Pacific International Livestock Exposition Halls, now the site of the Expo Center. They were later taken to a desolate camp in Minidoka, Idaho. The forced removal of an entire ethnic group was not caused only by wartime paranoia or hysteria. Even after 3 years of being exiled and the war's outcome clearly known, many local civic organizations and politicians tried to keep any ethnic Japanese from ever returning to the state. Understandably, less than half of these former Oregonians ever did return. So how does this local history inform your demolition review? The legal treatment of the Japanese during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s could be characterized as a concerted effort to ethnically cleanse Portland and Oregon of all Japanese. Now you must decide whether to demolish one of the few remaining historic resources that bears witness to this unique story, which has relevance today. Tearing down the Yamaguchi Hotel would be part of erasing this historic memory. At this time of racial reckoning, I urge you not to approve this demolition. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Next is Joselle Johnson.
My name is Joselle Johnson. I am a board member of the Northwest District Association Neighborhood Association, but today I'm testifying as a neighbor from the Northwest Portland who worked on the discussion of the Buck Prager project and ironically was a neighbor of Blanchet's House original director Al Ruffy and more importantly his dog Duffy. I'd like to ask the City Council to deny the demo permit and uphold the findings of the Bureau of Development Services. More time is needed to find a win-win solution. Development is needed on the adjacent park block, but I do not believe that demolishing this building without concrete plans is the best use of this specific property. The Blanchet House director has called out the outstanding work done by the Blanchet House after the demolition of the Dirty Duck. In this case, there is no clear tie to plans. There's discussions, but there's not specific applications that put forward that specific proposal. I'm not sure why there's not the link, and I again request that more time be taken to review a win-win situation. Again, bottom line, without this link, there is not a formal requirement to link the demolition with a specific services plan. Also, looking forward, by utilizing structures incorporated with new construction, that provides a bridge to the past while embracing the future use and future architecture. Work done at the Buck Prager, which is at Northwest 18th and Hoyt, and the integration of the historic firehouse at Northwest 15th and Gleason truly illustrate this action. There are other rehabilitations such as the KEX Hotel and other places that we've been able to see history providing a link to the past while supporting best use overall. For many rehabilitation projects, a savvy combination of the historic rehabilitation tax credit and the low-income housing tax credits facilitate the use of these properties. I worry that the approval of this request sets a precedence. Other building owners will use the same argument about conditions and restoration costs, leading to more demolitions and potentially eventually loss of this district and other key structures within Portland. Approving demolition by neglect is not what I want this city to be known for. We need to truly market this building to other potential buyers or other potential solutions. Prosper Portland was the only entity offered the property. So now the statement that the building is beyond saving and please demolish is disingenuous. I believe all options of the building use have not been explored. So without a clear plan or understanding what are the next steps, it is disrespectful to see the Asian culture heritage erased at this time when it is becoming under attack. The Dirty Duck had that complete plan in place. Demolition without a plan should not be accepted. Again, I ask the demolition request be denied and more time given for the solution or specific recommendation for future actions. Thank you.
Next up, we have Chizao Hata, Jennifer Fang, and Brian Emmerich.
Hello, members of council. I hope you can hear me. My name is Chisao Hata, and my mother is Kasae Tamiyasu, born in Hood River in 1916, and was one of the first Japanese American nurses in the state of Oregon. She graduated as the only non-white student in 1939 from the Portland Seventh-day Adventist Nursing School. Her legacy is tied to the history of Nihonmachi, Japantown, where my grandfather, Gunichi Tamiyasu, connected her with resources which led her to be accepted in pre-med program at Walla Walla College in Walla Walla, Washington. Her lifetime of nursing service included Poston, Arizona, an American concentration camp, Boulder, Colorado, and Des Moines, Iowa, where she proudly nursed and taught for over 50 years. As a current member of the board of directors of the newly imagined Japanese American Museum of Oregon on Northwest 4th and Flanders, just catty corner from the Blanchet House that we were speaking about, I implore you, do not demolish this Blanchet House. Not only is it one of the oldest buildings that represent a history of place in Oregon of Japanese Americans, it specifically honors the Yamaguchi family and hundreds more who lived in Japantown. Masaye Yamaguchi was the midwife who served Japanese Americans throughout Oregon, and where she and her sons, George and Roy, and daughter Mary lived. The hotel or rooming house walls hold deep histories. We must not erase them for the sake of progress, modernization, or to build lower income housing. Once gone, this history cannot be replaced and will add to the list of forgotten histories in America. The Japanese American community, businesses, schools, churches, homes, as they were hotels, were stolen with the issuance of Executive Order 9066. Our community never recovered. We lost our language, community infrastructure, and place. No one stood up then to prevent the violation given towards American citizens. We must protect our history now. It is the history of Oregon, of the United States. It is the history you and I in this place still call Portland. My history and our history is in these historic bricks.
Who's next?
Next, apologies, next is Jennifer Fang, who will also be sharing their screen.
Hello, I'm about to share a PowerPoint, so please just give me one moment while I pull this up. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint? Okay. My name is Dr. Jennifer Fang. I am the Director of Education at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, and I'm here today on behalf of the Japanese Museum of Oregon's Executive Director, Lynn Fuchigami Parks. I'm going to read her testimony as she is unable to attend today's meeting. So here goes. The mission of the Japanese American Museum of Oregon is to preserve and share the history and culture of the Japanese Americans in the Pacific Northwest, to educate the public about the Japanese American experience during World War II, and to advocate for the protection of civil rights for all. I'm here today to speak to the importance of the history of Blanchet House and its significance in telling the story of what was once Portland's large and thriving Nihonmachi, or Japantown, a 10 to 12 block area that now makes up the majority of Old Town. If these buildings could talk, they would tell a story of a vibrant community that existed until its people were forcibly removed and unjustly incarcerated for no other reason than fear and racial prejudice. They would tell you of the people and businesses that they held along with the American dream that was being realized for decades and how it disappeared overnight. And now there is another effort to continue this erasure of this history. With regard to policy 4.54, cultural diversity, and 4.55, cultural and social significance, not only is this historic district the only cultural heritage district in the state dedicated to AAPI cultural history, but this building, the Yamaguchi Hotel, was the home of a Japanese midwife. In reality, this is one of the few, if not only, known buildings in Oregon that is specifically identified to hold the history of a Japanese woman. It's a hidden history within hidden history. This building is a truly unique asset and tells the story that no other building in the city, let alone the state, can. To give you additional context, in Japan, midwives or sanba were certified and licensed by the government to demonstrate that Japan had educated women and adopted Western scientific medicine. They were highly respected in Japan and were held in high regard within the Japanese American community here. They served as cultural brokers, providing an important link for Japanese immigrant women between their old and new cultures. There are stories of the midwives traveling as far as Hood River to serve the community. And although they were prohibited from assisting with the delivery of babies in the concentration camps, they provided emotional support and both pre and postnatal care for women.
Excuse me, Jennifer, could you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
I just have one paragraph to wrap up, just a couple sentences. For these reasons, the Japanese American Museum of Oregon opposes the demolition of the Blanchet House as it represents erasure of significant history, community, and culture contained in this historic resource, and therefore does not meet the criteria for approval. In closing, we also support all the findings of the Bureau of Development Services recommendation that denies the demolition permit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Brian Emmerich.
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Brian Emmerich, and I'm a principal with Emmerich Architects and also a former landmarks commissioner during the Kiernan Block demolition review and the subsequent Riley Blanchet House approval during the commission's time. I'm going to speak specifically to the feasibility of renovating a unreinforced masonry building and to the costs that are claimed there, and also just the experience that the Landmarks Commission and City Council actually walked the old Blanchet House or the Yamaguchi Hotel shortly after they moved into the new building. And at that time, the structure, while it was tired and needed some love, it was not saturated timber and all of the deteriorating conditions that are described. So I have to believe that the roof wasn't maintained and other things were let go in that interim time. And that the applicants claimed that $1,318 a square foot is what's required to upgrade the building is pretty far beyond anything I've experienced in over 20 years specializing in unreinforced masonry buildings and adaptive reuse upgrades. We've done a lot of them and none have even approached half of that cost. Recently, we presented the Overland Warehouse example to you guys at the request of the Landmarks Commission. That was last year as an example of what could be done to bring these historic buildings back and how they revitalize the neighborhoods. That building's literally just a few blocks away on 4th Avenue and Davis Street in the district. And it was abandoned since the 1960s. We had a great adventurous landowner who saw the vision of the district, took that building on, and for $150 a square foot. We did a full seismic upgrade and really brought that building back and attracted Movell, who's a great global creative office tenant, and they moved their headquarters into that building and did a substantial tenant improvement based on that vision. So I think that that's what can happen when there's the opportunities left there and someone with vision can take it. As in another example, just recently, that was completed in 2016, by the way, and at the Landmarks Commission hearing, the $1,318 a square foot figure was noted that that was before current construction cost escalation. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, we got in an estimate for a 5-story, small footprint, unreinforced masonry upgrade that also included changing from creative office to 27 high-end apartments. And that full build out from Brimmick Construction came in at $355 a square foot. So dramatically different than what's being represented. And I think that's the main crux of the argument is economic feasibility. And I think further study really needs to be had to really determine that what the cost is, because that seems really far out there. So that's mainly what I wanted to communicate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, the last opponent of the applicant is Amanda Shanahan.
Amanda, can you unmute?
Yes, okay. Hi, my name is Amanda Shanahan. I'm a board member of the Portland Japanese American Citizens League, but today I am providing personal testimony to encourage City Council to deny the demo permit for the Blanchet House. As a Yonsei or 4th generation Japanese American, the new Chinatown, Japantown Historic District holds a special place in my heart. To me, it represents the strength and resiliency of my community, and it brings me a lot of pride to be able to visit and gather with friends and family at places in the district, like the new Japanese American Museum of Oregon and the Japanese American Historical Plaza. Today, there are fewer and fewer buildings that hold the history of Nihon Machi or Japantown in their bones. The Yamaguchi Hotel is one of them. I hate to think of our city losing another piece of history, another piece of evidence of the vibrant and thriving Japanese American community that existed downtown before World War II. Many history books and lessons would like us to believe that the Japanese American experience in Oregon began with incarceration or quote unquote internment. The Yamaguchi Hotel, which as we've heard today was also home to the community's midwife, Mrs. Yamaguchi, helps tell a different story. A story that begins from a place of strength, connection, and care. A story where we are more than our oppression. That is the story that I hope to one day pass on to my children, and is why I'm urging the City Council today to help find a way to preserve this important cultural and historical site for current and future generations. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. At this time, I want to pause and see if my City Council colleagues have any questions up till this point. And just so that people know where we are, after this conversation, we will have rebuttal from the applicant. And then the City Council will have an opportunity to have a discussion. And then we will decide kind of what the next options are moving forward. So everybody knows what's next. But are there any questions now that have come up in the previous testimony, or would you like to just wait until after we hear the rebuttal to have our conversation? I'm seeing heads go up and down. I will take that as we're going to move on to the rebuttal by the applicant. And the applicant has 5 minutes for that.
Thank you very much. Again, Christy White, Land Use Counsel for the applicant. I'll first address the approval criteria that we're proceeding under. Some testimony was that we should be under approval criteria C2 instead of C1. Let me explain why we are under C1. C1 says deprive the owner of all reasonable economic use of this site. So the owner here is Blanchet House. It's not Prosper Portland. It's not another developer. It's not a neighbor. It's not a group who thinks they can do better than Blanchet House with its own mission on its own site. So it is the owner. And then it is of all reasonable economic use of the site. The site here is the 2,500 square foot corner. It's not Prosper's property. It's not a neighboring property. The criteria asks this owner to prove that they're deprived of all reasonable economic use of the site. We have demonstrated that under C1, and it seems like the largest challenge to that is that other people who are also experts in their field believe that our site costs are excessive. Our site costs were due to a comprehensive and forensic evaluation of this property. And I hear the dispute of the numbers, and I'm wondering if there's some confusion. Our numbers are not just the construction costs. The numbers are the construction costs, they're the development costs, they're the financing fees. We tried to look at this comprehensively. What would it take to return this to a habitable and safe condition, and not the minimum necessary for any particular use, but safe, habitable, to serve a reasonable economic use of the property. What were those reasonable economic uses? We did not limit that inquiry to the nursing clinic, although we believe that's what will be pursued on this site. Instead, as you saw from the Johnson Economic Study, we tried to be the most conservative and say, well, what if the building had a creative office user or a tenant that would pay higher lease rates? Would that make it reasonably economic? And the answer was no. So this idea that we need to talk to other property owners under the C1 criteria, or that our numbers aren't reasonable, is refuted by the evidence in the record. And again, I'll mention that without acknowledging the experience of others, the people we hired to do this analysis included people who worked on Pietro Belushi's building, the Blue and Wright Company building, the brewery blocks, the Oregon State Capitol, the Supreme Court building, Blagenblock's building, the On building, and multiple other buildings. They too have experience in this arena and have no professional reason to overestimate their costs. With that, I'll move on to the precedent. Totally understand this argument. Understand that there is a concern for precedent. This doesn't create precedent. This is a high bar. This is a rigorous evaluation. These demolition permits under this criteria don't come along very often or at all, as Mr. Heron said. And to use other projects like the Prager project that turned it into a market rate building and had two other buildings on both sides that were willing to brace that building with seismic code upgrades. Those aren't precedent for this situation, which doesn't have that opportunity, is 2,500 square feet and is next to a vacant lot. As to the broken promises and that the idea that Blanchet House broke any promise at all, we would refute that. Everyone in the city knows, including all of the social service agencies, that you can call Blanchet House at any time and they will respond and they will answer and they will do what they said they would do. As to Ms. Richter's comments about this worked better last time under the Dirty Duck because we were able to weigh the advantages of the redevelopment against the disadvantages of demolition. I'll just remind everyone for the record that the Landmarks Commission actually denied the demolition permit in the Dirty Duck on the balancing of the benefits that would generate from the redevelopment versus the disadvantages of demolition. They then approved through a Landmarks Commission review the new Blanchet House, but they denied demolition when they weighed those purpose statements. And I'll quote from that letter to City Council in 2010. Quote, although the HLC applauds the Blanchet House's mission and fully endorses its future success, we do not believe that the public service benefit provided by the Blanchet House can or should be considered in this because the building's use cannot be controlling. It would be improper, they stated, for the council to allow demolition upon a finding that the social benefit provided by the Blanchet House can or should be considered. Your council rejected that in 2010 for very good reasons and that have since come to pass, as you can see, and it should be rejected again today.
Thank you, Christy.
Oh, thank you very much.
Appreciate you. So that was the rebuttal from the appellate. And now, City Council, what is the pleasure of the council? I certainly, I think for me, one of the questions is what or what could not happen with Prosper Portland. And clearly we are not here to vote on what Prosper Portland could or could not do in the future. We've been asked whether or not to uphold BDS findings that would actually reject this application. And I have to say, honestly, for me, I am really torn. I certainly understand the historic nature of why the designation is so key. And I certainly understand how a slippery slope could be reached if we continue to make exceptions to what is supposedly about preservation and restoration. Having said that, the building that we are talking about today has none of the attributes that people spoke in so highly in favor of when that building was operational. That building today is a health issue and it is of severe concern and has been for quite some time. So for me, I am being asked to measure between what is a history of racism that Japanese Americans experience, and we certainly know that that was the experience, especially. I was going to say especially, and I won't even say especially. Even today, is what I will say. But again, we are not being asked to rule on that today. The question is whether or not Blanchard House has done their due diligence and made the case for us to, has the Bureau made the case for us to support their recommendations, or has Blanchard House made the case for us to make a different decision? And so I'm very interested in hearing if my colleagues are, how are you feeling? Is this something that you feel that you have a tentative position on today? Commissioner Max.
Thank you.
Oh, what's her name? It's fine.
Well, I'm trying to figure presiding officer. I don't have the nomenclature down at this late hour. First of all, I want to thank everyone for their testimony. I suspect a lot of us on council are torn. I am convinced of the challenges associated with rehabilitating.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry, I see Lindley's hand up. Could I just pause you for a minute, Commissioner Maps, because I may have done something I shouldn't have. Yes, Lindley.
Yes, I think we need to do one initial step before your conversation. I apologize, I was not finding my hand raising myself today. Before you move on to council discussion, I think we need to determine whether council is ready to close the record, whether it has asked all the questions. There was not a request for the record to be held open, and therefore council may close the record. Council could leave it open if it so chooses, but it also could close the record and begin council discussion.
And actually, I was just trying to get a feel, Lindley, for where the council is at the moment, and then I was going to come back to that point. Is that appropriate?
Yes, it is. I didn't want to miss that, and I apologize for interrupting you, Commissioner Maps.
Not a problem. And basically where I was leading is I'd like to keep the record open.
Is there additional information that you will need in making your decision, Commissioner Maps?
I'd like to, not really. What I'd like to do is take a closer look at some of the arguments and evidence that were put before us today, both to compare the information given to us from BDS and by the property owners.
So what I'm hearing, Commissioner Maps, is not a request to keep the record open, but a request to not be asked to take a vote today, but to do it at a later time. That's what I heard. I just want to know if I'm hearing correctly.
I would prefer not to take a vote today.
And that is fine. But I just want to check with the lawyer. My understanding of what the proposal was by Commissioner Maps was not that he needed information outside of what he's heard today. what I'm hearing is that he needs more time to actually consider what he's heard today.
And that's appropriate. I think it would be good, Commissioner Maps, for you to confirm that was your intent, is to simply have additional time to consider the evidence that's currently in the record rather than get more information.
That would be helpful to me, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you. I certainly also feel in a similar place of Commissioner Maps, where I'd like to reflect on the record. I also don't know, I have some additional questions. I don't know if they're better directed at the appellant, or if it would qualify as seeking additional information. So I have that open.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Rubio. I would recommend that let's hear from Commissioner Ryan, and I will come back and address your question.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, everyone who testified. It actually was very compelling, and I am in the same boat as the other commissioners that I just need more time. It's been quite a day, and based on our dialogue this morning, voting on this right now, just sometimes you need to breathe. You know, you need to like have some reflection time, and I have not dug into this in the way that I would like. So I feel pushed right now, and every time I feel pushed and I make a decision, I usually regret it. So I just need some time.
Well, there is no pressure here today, Commissioner Ryan. I mean, today was an opportunity for the appellate to make their case, for us to hear about people who opposed their position. And I think we've done a really good job of that. I'm going to recommend that we close the public record today, as of the close of this hearing today, and recommend that Megan give us a date, time certain that the City Council will take this up again, and we will take it up as part of again, deliberating, having a public conversation, and then taking a vote at that time. Commissioner Maps.
Yes, I don't know if this counts as keeping the record open, but I do have a question that wasn't clearly answered in today's presentation, and certainly would help me make a decision here. It sounds like Blanchet House has a vision for what would happen at this space once the building comes down, some sort of medical clinic. I sure wish, and I'm a little bit surprised and confused why we didn't see more about what that space would look like. I think that's an important piece of information, and it's not clear to me why it's not wasn't part of today's record.
I'm gonna try to answer that, and then I'm gonna ask Lindley to weigh in. I would say that it was not what the appeal was based on. There were two questions asked: whether or not we would actually allow for demolition, and that we would waive a procedure. Those were the two asks, and so that would be my interpretation, unless someone has something else.
Commissioner Hardesty, it might be appropriate, Tim Herron, for staff to respond to that, if you think, Tim.
Please.
Take a stab at that. It's new information. The first I heard of it was on Monday, and it is not articulated in a way that is a replacement building, which is the concern of the adjustment review. It's articulated in the way of a replacement idea. So my evaluation of that would be it still falls in the same kind of denial category of it. It's not mitigation. That's palpable if council felt the demolition review was approvable. So I mean, it would probably be good to ask the applicant if they wanted to expand further on that intent, or if they planned on submitting more. My working with them was, I know that this was an important date for them to keep. I don't know that they want this hearing to be extended necessarily to add more information, but that's something for them to clarify.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Maps, if the inquiry is whether that's something that could, say, be a condition of approval, that would be something you'd have to ask the applicant, because at this point, I don't think there's enough information to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'll defer to.
Commissioner Mapps, I have a follow-up on your question, Tim, which would be, there was no requirement for the applicant to submit a detailed proposal of what the plan was with their application. Am I accurate on that, or am I not?
Oh, sorry, I had to find myself on all my squares. Well, it's a little nuanced. The adjustment request is to not provide a replacement building concept in the first place. So the new information about another concept, I think is interesting. And I think we heard some testimony about, could that concept be incorporated in the existing building vis-a-vis a restoration? So I don't know that it's about reviewing that building. Again, I think it's more about asking the applicant for clarity. I think they're providing an idea, but staff's opinion is it's not mitigation that does any further to support an adjustment to not provide a replacement building design that would otherwise hold up the demolition permit.
Thank you, Tim. Commissioner Rubio.
I just still have my outstanding question about whether it's appropriate to keep the record open for my question if it qualifies as new information or if it's something I should ask the applicant now.
My question now, and then we'll figure out if there's a need to open the record back up for additional information.
Okay. But I can also save it for later. But my question is really about have there been any pre-existing conversations or communication or involvement around the history of this site and its connection to the Japanese American community in Portland? Have there been conversations or connection? And how has that, what have been those outcomes of the conversation? And I really had it for both sides, but we had some testimony, but would really like that question answered on the proponent side and opponent as well.
So I think we should ask both sides to answer that question. Who wants to start? Christy?
I'm trying to, there I am. So I think that a question in terms of communications with the communities that are impacted or stakeholders in this proposal is best suited for Scott Kerman, because they're on the ground in that community all the time, and it would be pretty presumptuous of me to try to answer that question. The other question,
Christy, I'm going to have Scott do it then.
Okay, good call.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, commissioners. So no one in the community has approached us about this building. I only recently learned that prior to purchasing property at the Old Town Lofts, the Japanese American Museum had sought properties in the district with historical relevance. I don't believe they ever contacted Blanchet House about the old Blanchet House. It seems like, based on the discussion today, that would have been an ideal location for the museum. So I can't speak as to why they didn't consider it. And now that they purchased property in the Old Town Lofts, that's probably not something that can be pursued. To be honest, I only recently learned of this history with regards to the Yamaguchi Hotel. We've tried to search out the history of the building. A week ago, I Googled this to see if I could find anything. The only website that came up was a page that was recently provided by the Restore Oregon organization. This is a history that I wasn't aware of, and no one in the community had ever, at least in the time that I've been at Blanchet House, approached us about this. And I hope that answers your question.
No, that's helpful. Tim, do you want to add anything?
No, I guess my only add would be a lot of the information that's come to bear is through the testimony that we've heard in written. We've received a couple pieces of testimony even throughout the day today and during the hearing as well. That'll be as a part of the record. So I definitely appreciate the commissioners wanting to take time and thoroughly review that. But there's a lot of significant history, and I guess my thought would be that sometimes during these reviews that kind of shakes people up and says, oh, we gotta gather, we gotta do something about this. And so I think that's what you'll see and read in a lot of the testimony that's been provided.
Well, thank you very much. Commissioner Rubio, does that answer your question?
It does.
Excellent. Commissioner Ryan.
Yeah, I apologize for perhaps missing this. I think some of you know that Comcast was out in North Portland for about an hour, about 2 hours, but I got on the phone eventually. How many years has it been sitting vacant again? Who am I talking to? Is that you, Tim?
Tim.
Yeah, I believe, and perhaps Scott can correct me down to the day, I'm sure, but around 2012, I believe you all had officially moved out.
Okay, what kind of action has been taken over the last 10 years to preserve this building for heritage and history's sake?
I would lean to Scott or on someone else on his team to answer that one.
Well, Scott's wouldn't it be from those folks that want to restore and?
Well, Commissioner Ryan,
am I asking a question that's not okay?
Well, no. I just was trying to figure out where would be the best place to get your question answered, because I think there's a difference between what the condition of the building today. If you and I went to that building right now, the condition of that building today, or what could have been possible in 2018, right? And I think that is the issue. Many of the testimony we heard today were about permitting the destruction by neglect. I don't believe at all that Blanchet House neglected it. I know how nonprofits operate and the very thin margins that they operate under. So if the choice is between roof or food, they make the choice of food, and I would do the same thing. And so I think we're talking about what could be as compared to what exists today. So for me personally, I just feel like that's not a fair question, because it hasn't been a building that has been habitable since I showed up at City Hall, and I'm sure long before that.
Yeah, my question was not directed to maybe the right side. I was wondering, with all of those that gave testimony today, that was very meaningful about the history of the building. I'm trying to get a sense of, is this mobilization come about because of the threat, or have there been action by the lobby that have actually desired to do something like a history museum? I just can't understand what the action has been from those.
That is about what comes next, right? If the city council continues to make allowances in historic districts, this is the big fear, is that we will continue to make these types of allowances. These properties will disappear, and this history will disappear. And again, I understand. I understand that fear, because it's easy to slide down a slippery slope. But again, I think the question that we're being asked to answer is very much more narrow than that. This is a particular property that is owned by a particular nonprofit, and it is not an inhabitable building. One of the first things I inherited when I came to the city of Portland was the issue of unreinforced masonry buildings. And it just kind of ended up in my lap because of my position as Commissioner of Fire and Rescue. And I can tell you that we put a committee together. We really tried to make sure that it would not impact especially low income and nonprofit providers. But the reality is we could not come up with a plan where the city or the state or the federal government could provide enough support for the hundreds of unreinforced masonry buildings in the city of Portland. Some of them are in better shape than others, but I learned much more in my first year than I ever thought I wanted to know about unreinforced masonry buildings. So there are a lot of things that we have to consider, and I certainly respect the fact that people want to take some time and review both the written testimony and the oral testimony. But I also don't want us to get caught in a false conversation about really what it is we're voting on today. Yes, Lindley, I see your hand.
I'm just noting that there is a hand raised by one of the attendees. That particular attendee had expressed some concern about not being on video. So I suspect she's wanting to respond to the question. And if we can allow her to share her video, that would be fantastic.
I am open to that. Any disagreement in allowing someone to answer and show their video? Not seeing any? Let's do it.
Thank you. My name for the excuse me. Thank you. My name for the record is Carrie Richter. I testified earlier on, and I just want to point out that in 2010, the Landmarks Commission did have an opportunity to tour what was the Blanchet House. And at the time of the Kiernan building demolition, there was a great deal of concern about the impact that Blanchet moving out of this building would have to the Yamaguchi Hotel. We were very concerned about the loss of this resource to the district, to the architectural heritage, and to the cultural heritage that has been so decimated. There was concern, there was motivation, and the response we got was Portland Development Commission will take care of it. They have an option. They support preservation activities, and they will help. And they are conspicuously absent today. And that is unexcusable.
Thank you, Carrie. That's really helpful. And you actually reminded me of something, which is that we, in fact, are not making decisions for Prosper Portland, the former Portland Development Commission. So thank you. I appreciate that. Does that answer your question, Ryan? Commissioner Ryan?
It gave me more insight. Sure.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to recommend to, I see your hand up, Dan. I'm going to recommend to Megan that she give us a date and time certain that this item will be rescheduled for the council agenda. Yes, Dan.
Well, I just wanted to say that, there's been lots of time already, and how much more time would it wouldn't make any difference. I think John McGuigan did a very good job of reviewing our agreement with the PDC and pointed out there was a 6-year window if the city wanted to do something, or a developer from the historic group of developers wanted to show up. They had a 6-year window, and then even after that, the building's been sitting there. They were well aware that it was available, and if they wanted to approach us, they could have, but didn't.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. And let me just say again, we all live in a city where Portland Development Commission over the years made promises that were never kept. And now we have Prosper Portland, which is this city's economic development arm. But I also want to be very clear that they don't have the resources today in order to take on any new development projects. So I would not assume that there is a window with PDC or Prosper Portland today that would actually change the outcome of the conversation we're having today. Tim, I don't want to take, unless you have something really new to add, I am moving on because it feels like we're covering the same territory over and over again. Is there something uniquely different, Tim, that you'd like to put on this record for this moment?
Oh, Commissioner, I love how you asked that question. I thank you. I appreciate it. I know it's getting late. I just want to make sure I understood something correctly because Dan, and thank you for speaking up again. Your testimony, you specifically said the property is no longer for sale. So I guess I want to make sure I understand if that's true still, because I heard that in testimony today and I had not heard that before, and I made a note of it. And so I guess, is the old Blanchet house still for sale, or is it not available to be purchased? Should there be a champion that shows up between now and the next city council hearing?
If somebody is disconnected, this is Christy, and I'll just answer to that really quickly. No. And the reason for no is because they need to retain this property now for their growing and critical mission. And that's where we're at.
Thank you. And that was a uniquely
Thank you.
different question, Tim. You did a good job. Megan, can you give us the day and time at Lindley?
Can we clarify, I guess, Megan, please look at day and time, but I'd like to make sure I understand what is happening between now and then. Are you going to close the record and then we're coming back for council deliberations
That is
only?
correct. The public record will be closed at the end of this meeting, and we will come back for city council deliberation on a date and time that Megan
Okay.
tells us.
I'd like to point out both staff, Mr. Heron and I are out next week, so it would be preferable not to have it next week. And I think, Tim, you're back the week after, yes?
Yes.
We
I'm
actually
pretty
have,
sure we're not going to be able to get it scheduled that quickly. I also want to make sure that the mayor has an opportunity to review the record as well. He had an excused absence this afternoon. So Megan?
yep, that's a great point. So all council members will be available, or there are no absences on July 22nd. So we're looking at July 22nd at 2 p.m.
Excellent. So again, I want to thank everyone who provided testimony today. It was really helpful for you to be here and present to the council. We will give it due deliberation, and we will be back. When is that?
July 22nd at 2 p.m. time certain.
July 20. I almost said January 22nd. That'd have been a little while later, but July 22nd at 2 p.m. Thank you all. And if I can have the council stay as people rotate off so that we can complete our agenda from this morning, I would be very appreciative. And that means you too, Megan, I hope.
Yes, I'll be here.
All right. I should have checked with Lindley to make sure we did all the legal stuff appropriately.
I think you all did a great job. And I also, Commissioner, really appreciate your willingness to let me jump in. It's nice. Thank you.
Oh, anytime, right? Anytime you keep me from being illegal, it's a good day. So Megan, we are going to go back to this morning's agenda, and we are going to complete the 3 items that we had left. And if you would read the first item, please.
Yes, item 523, amend grant agreements from the fiscal year 2021 Community Watershed Program to be completed in fiscal year 2022.
Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, this is a housekeeping ordinance which corrects an omission from Ordinance 190505, which this council approved last September. That ordinance approved a slate of grants to community groups for community-led watershed enhancement projects. However, that ordinance did not provide authority for amendments to grant agreements. Due to the COVID-19 emergency, several grantees would like more time to finish projects. This ordinance provides the Bureau Director with authority to sign amendments to those grant agreements. And I believe we don't actually have testimony from staff on this. This is a very straightforward housekeeping thing.
Any questions? Any community testimony, Megan?
No one has signed up for this item.
Excellent. This is an emergency measure. Megan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Aye.
Mapps.
Aye.
Rubio.
Rubio, can you hear us?
Oh, hi, I didn't hear anything for a minute. I'm sorry.
Apologies about that. Hardesty.
Aye. Thank you. The ordinance is adopted. Please read the next item, Megan.
Item 524, amend sewer user charges code to support updates to system development charges.
Commissioner Maps.
This is a second reading. We took a look at this probably last week. If anyone has any questions, we might have staff here. Otherwise, I'm comfortable just going to a vote.
Excellent. Megan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Rubio.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye. The motion passes. Megan, last item on our agenda today.
Item 525.
Commissioner
Approve
Maps. Oh, sorry.
Approve findings to authorize an exemption for a class of public improvement contracts from the competitive bidding requirements and authorize the use of the alternative contracting method of price agreements for construction services.
This is also a second reading, but I want to really thank Commissioner Maps because he and I talked about this quite a bit when this was last in front of the council. And Commissioner Maps has some amendments I believe he wants to move forward.
Yes, here's the way I think today is going to go. I'm going to introduce some amendments to this this ordinance. We'll vote on the amendments, and then it probably comes back for another reading, hopefully next week. For members of council who are trying to remember what this item is, this was a proposal to allow BES to experiment with using requests for proposals in lieu of low bid with the goal of increasing minority contracting. At the last time this came before council, there were some concerns. One of the things that I've done in the interim is to talk to my colleagues. And I have two amendments today, which I think might make this a 5-0 vote. I'll just be frank. So the two amendments that I'd like to put forward today would be number one, add an amendment which requires BES to report to council on the status of this project on an annual basis. In the original proposal, there was no reporting requirement. The second amendment that I would like to put forward would basically require this this project to come back before council in 2 years for reauthorization. The original proposal ran for 5 years without a reauthorization requirement. Essentially, this provides some accountability. One of the things I think that we can do after 2 years is to see how well this approach to contracting actually helps us meet our minority contracting goals. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I know Lindley's about to ask me to have us vote on them one at a time. And Lindley, you had something else?
Yeah, I just would like to make sure for the sake of our council clerk staff that we have the actual amendment language submitted, and so people can see that if they want to.
I believe you should, but let's confirm.
Yes, that's my understanding, that we have that language.
Colleagues, have you seen it? Commissioner Rubio, yes. Commissioner Ryan, yes.
Yeah, so okay. I don't think, Commissioner, it's necessary to vote on the amendment separately. I think it's just important that the amendment language is available.
Excellent, excellent. But thank you. Is there conversation on the two amendments that Commissioner Maps has moved forward? I want to personally say thank you. We had a very lively conversation a week or so ago. And it is always, I think we always come up with better policy when we can have those lively conversations, and then we can go back and figure out how we can build agreement moving forward. We saw that this morning on our housing vote. And I believe Commissioner Maps, when he says he's going to hold his bureau accountable to better outcomes, and we built in the accountability to make that so. So I am very happy to support these amendments and would also support the final 525 with the amendments that are being proposed. So I think we should. I think you have moved two amendments, Commissioner Maps. Would you articulate them once again for the record?
Sure. So the First Amendment would require BES to report to council on an annual basis on the status of its pilot contracting project. And the Second Amendment would require BES to return to council in 2 years to seek reauthorization for this project. And I believe council staff has the formal language for these amendments in their records.
Thank you, and I'll accept a second.
Second.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Rubio. And so at this point, this measure, I'm sorry, 525 will be moved forward for a additional second reading.
We have to vote on the amendments, right?
Yeah, did we
Yes.
do that? No, I guess I missed that. I thought we did. Okay, Megan, call the roll on the amendments, please.
Ryan,
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Maps and Commissioner Hardesty, for those lively conversations. Accountability, transparency, but it wasn't like too hyper. Like I like that you had a year, not every 6 months. And anyway, that usually leads to results. I vote aye.
Maps,
Aye.
Rubio,
Aye.
Hardesty.
You can tell it's the end of the day. Even Commissioner Maps isn't excited about his amendments. I vote aye. The amendments pass. And now we will move this item to second reading on the next council agenda. Megan, does that complete our agenda for today?
Yes, it does.
You have all been excellent troopers. Thank you, Lindley. You kept us legal. Thank you all. Have a fabulous afternoon. See you soon. Bye-bye. We are adjourned.